Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you to the organizers of this event. So you know, they have worked incredibly hard to bring this to you, and I guess that's in keeping with the spirit of the event. And yes, I thought Harvard was in England. So yeah, when I sent my application in and it went to Cambridge, Massachusetts, I thought how quaint, they have an American mail drop. Yes. So I'm supposed to talk to you for 8 minutes, and as my students know, that's ridiculously impossible. But I'll do my best to keep this as short as possible. I'm supposed to be presenting a point of view of practical humanism. So bear with me, please, because I'm going to not be really funny or whatnot for a while, and just try to really get to the heart of why I think hard work is important. And hopefully Paul can elicit some good anecdotes afterwards. So first, what on earth is humanism, and why would it relate to this? And for that, I noticed with 7 billion people on this earth, there's no one religion we all agree to, and there's no one system of governance or economics. People just struggle to agree, which actually is good, except we do agree on one thing, a basic system of ethics. You can overwhelmingly, you can ask people from any persuasion, from anywhere on earth, and ask them, should we protect the innocent? Is violence acceptable? And the answer would be no, unless it's for self-defense, and then yes. There's a set of core beliefs, and these seem to be part of the human experience, independent of everything else. Humanism says you can base your philosophy and your life experience on those beliefs and lead a rich, full life, not in rejection of religion, not in rejection of nature, nurture, or any other explanation of where this came from. I don't know where it came from, but I've looked at thousands of students coming through the school, and they exhibit these core ethics. Fine, so what? Well, so the next thing is, can you understand why we work hard based on these ethics? And let me say, we work hard. We work crazy stupid hard. Okay? I added up the time that my students and staff spend on my course alone, one of the easier courses here. And it turns out to about 50,000 person hours per semester. Yes. So, that's about 25 years of full-time employment per semester. So there's a scary responsibility that goes with marshaling that kind of human endeavor. And so I believe that it's incumbent upon us as faculty to think really hard about why are we doing this? Are we doing it just to waste your time? I hope not. So I hope to explain a bit of that. And for that, I was going to actually give you an underpinning based upon physical laws of the universe and then have some clever metaphorical applications of them. I think I'm going to cut that short because 8 minutes is so short. But I'll say, for instance, I taught to my students about conservation of momentum, okay? Newton's second law. And what the heck does that have to do with hard work? And the answer is this. Having watched thousands of students, again, interact, what I notice is when two people interact, be it, oh, no way. She flashed the time to me. She just tells funny jokes. Yes. So when people interact, people collide in the idea space the way things collide physically. And the winner, just like by Newton's second law, is the one with greater momentum. Intellectual momentum is your mass times your velocity. But mass in this context is your smarts. Now, everyone in this room is pretty smart. That's why you're here. That's cool. And maybe some are smarter than others, but not that much, really. The difference is the V, velocity. And velocity in this context means effort. I have seen time and time again, the student who tries harder wins. The student who tries harder not only gets the better homework, gets the better test. Those aren't relevant. They get the better job. They have the more meaningful contributions to humanity. They're more satisfied. They have a deeper, richer, fuller experience. And that is the starting point for me thinking, gosh, maybe this hard work, maybe there's something to it. Brief aside, don't you dare think hard work unto itself leads to a rich life. You better make sure that you sleep, which my students don't seem to, okay? And I beg them to. that you eat well, that you exercise, that you take advantage of this fabulous campus with its arts and humanities and its technical schools. This is a place of many aspirations, and you should pursue all of them. But back to hard work. Now, what do my students do with all this hard work? And for that, I was trying to find a way to convey to you why I think this is important. And the answer is, again, my students and their outcomes. So, I started listing students and what they've done over the years, and I backed away from that and thought, no, I want to capture this in a more practical way. So practically speaking, all I did is look through my last week of email, and I'm going to talk to you about that. First, there were about 750 emails this last week. Yes, and I send a lot of email, and yeah, and often at 2 in the morning. So let me say this. Aside from the, what is it, about, do a little math here, 3,500 person hours that my students put into my course last week, I also dealt with some student projects I want to tell you about. And this is cutting to the core of what I'm here to talk to you about. And here it is. This is just 1 week in my life, just another week like any week. These are the student projects that I interacted with. A student group wants to take over Google Sky Map. Google Sky is this application. You can take out your cell phone, if I had a cell phone here, right? If you know what these are, right? And it'll like use GPS to tell you what you're looking at in the sky. Pretty cool. Maybe not amazing. Cool that CMU students are taking that over from Google. Maybe cooler. Some students walk down the block to the School for the Blind. And that number's going down, I take it. Yes. I have 2 minutes remaining. So you all should hurry up. So they walked down the block to the School for the Blind, and they went there. This is all on their own. By the way, these are freshmen and sophomores. They went there and they established a relationship between CMU and the School for the Blind so that now we can provide educational software for blind students there. It's cool stuff. Gets better. I don't know if it gets better, it just keeps going. There's a student who's creating a unified CMU calendar, a single spot where you can get information about everything that's going on campus. Hard to believe we don't have such a thing, but we don't. Okay? Now that's not maybe as lofty as stuff for the blind, which of course has a certain loftiness to it, but yet it helps us build community. It's of tremendous value here. We have students creating new educational content for new courses, including a new online self-paced auto-graded course for students who aren't here to take courses at the same materials that we're going to use in our own courses here. But the students are doing this, freshmen and sophomores. We have a group of students who made Mapist, if you've heard of it. It's also NavCMU. This is a group of students who built software that does mapping does mapping like Google Maps, but within buildings. So you can say, how do I get from where I am right now here, say, to the nearest place that's not here? No, to my office, say, and it would give me a map inside the buildings. That doesn't sound more than just a convenience, although it's a cool convenience until you realize the first people who wanted to use this app was CMU security. And the reason was, A, they want to train their new recruits to more quickly understand how to get around campus, and B, when Pittsburgh EMS responds to emergencies on campus, they don't know the layout of the campus, and precious time is lost in that regard, and this can help save lives on campus. Okay? Now, none of this is speculative. None of this is, gee, I'd like this to happen. All of this is real, and here's one for you, and this is the last one I'll talk about, a sleep disorders group. They're making an inexpensive product that can sit connected to an Android phone in a bed and measure your movements while you sleep. To help, for instance, CMU students, this can be good for you, to maybe help you get more REM cycles in a shorter amount of time. But it could also prospectively be used, and this was very exciting to me, to be put in cribs so it can detect movements in babies and maybe just detect the possibility of a potential SIDS outcome and save babies' lives. Whew. So we start with 3,500 hours of homework applied to homework and 50,000 hours in a semester. And not long after that, we got to saving babies' lives. and saving lives on responses, EMS responses to campus, and all these, helping blind children. I mean, look, all of this good can really happen. So look, did you come to CMU to get good grades? No, that's ridiculous. Look, grades, look, I'll tell you what, when I write a recommendation for a student who got solid A's throughout their stay here, I damn them with faint praise. I say they got A's. When I write a recommendation that says, you know what, this student got B's and a couple C's, but oh my goodness, they changed the world. Those are the recommendations that matter. So do you do it for money? Well, that's ridiculous. First, you're all going to make millions of dollars. And if you think I'm wrong, the minimum salary in this room when you're out in the real world will what, be 40, 50,000? Multiply that over 40 years, there's millions of dollars. You're all making millions of dollars. Okay? It's true. So now, to go for the money instead of for what you care about is to go after more millions of dollars. And when you say it that way, doesn't it sound a little wrong? Of course it's wrong. Of course, money's not wrong, but going after money for money's sake is just totally losing track of what's important in life. And for the glory is ridiculous. Don't go after glory. Go after the voice in your heart that tells you what matters. Go after helping children who are blind if that's what matters to you. Go after whatever's in your heart, and here's the secret. What we teach you here, when you're spending hours on your homework here, is not how to have saved lives, you know, and stop SIDS babies and so forth. What we teach you here are the technical underpinnings that you're going to be required to use to do whatever it is that matters to you. So find what matters to you and then apply yourself and work hard to make the world a better place. And that is why we work hard. Thank you.
So I guess when I started this, I thought the most terrifying thing in the world would be trying to prepare a talk about the work, the universe, and everything in 8 minutes. And I now realize that's just slightly less terrifying than going after David Kosbie and before Marie Norman. So let me just start off by thanking the students for organizing this event and by thanking my fellow panelists for being part of this. I'm looking forward to our time together, and I'm really looking forward to an open and respectful dialogue about what are some really important and challenging issues. Now, in thinking about how to explain a Christian view on work, which was my role, I realized that nothing I could say would make much sense without first explaining what Jesus taught about the relationship between good works, good deeds, if you will, and being accepted by God. And here's where the challenging part of our discussion starts, because as I thought about how to explain this, I realized it's incredibly hard to talk about faith without somehow leaving the impression that I'm looking down on you or condemning you or judging you if you don't believe what I believe. So let me stay right here at the start that not only don't I look down on you, but if I'm following what Jesus taught, I can't and I shouldn't judge or condemn you. In fact, let me go further and say if anybody claiming to be a Christian leaves you with the impression that you have to start living a better life before you can gain acceptance by God, that you have my permission to get up in their face and tell them they don't even understand what Jesus taught. In fact, if I leave you with that impression, you have my permission to get up in my face. I just prefer you wait until I'm done talking, okay? So what did Jesus teach? Well, as I see it, at the heart of basically every worldview is this idea that if you follow, that there's a standard of behavior, of good works, and that if you follow that standard, you'll be accepted, and if you don't follow that standard, you'll be condemned. So the upshot is that you have to work hard before you gain your acceptance. Now, how is what Jesus taught different? Well, to explain that, let me quote a highly respected 21st century philosopher, Bono of the rock group U2. Right? In an interview, Bono says the following: you see, at the center of all religions is the idea of karma. You know, what you put out comes back to you, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Or in physics, every action is met by an equal or opposite one. And yet along comes this idea called grace, to upend all that as you reap, so you will sow stuff. Grace defies reason and logic. Love interrupts, if you will, the consequences of your actions, which in my case is very good news indeed, because I've done a lot of stupid stuff. And Bono goes on to say, I'd be in big trouble if karma was finally going to be my judge. It doesn't excuse my mistakes, but I'm holding out for grace. I'm holding out that Jesus took my sins onto the cross because I know who I am, and I hope that I don't have to depend on my own religiosity. Okay? I think what Bono's saying is that Jesus came into a world kind of like our own, where there were a lot of people teaching that if you do enough good works, you'll be accepted. And Jesus taught the exact opposite. He taught that the acceptance comes first. He taught that there is a standard of behavior and that I haven't lived up to it, and that no amount of good works on my part will ever make up for the mistakes I've made. And that, in effect, I owe a debt that I can't pay, and that Jesus wants to pay that debt for me. And if you really believe that, if you really embrace that, it means that your acceptance is based on something that Jesus has already done for you, which means that there's nothing you can do to lose that acceptance. And there's nothing you can do to lose your identity with God. And because your identity is secure, you can relax and respond to the world around you out of love, as opposed to out of a fear of losing your acceptance. And I really believe that getting your mind around this idea can change even the most stressed out, hyper-competitive, hypocritical person. And I believe that because it changed me. Now, what does this have to do with work? Well, quite a lot, actually. Because in the same way that religion can lead us to base our identity on our ability to live up to a moral standard of perfection, work can lead us to base our identity on achieving things like success and power and money and praise. And there are two problems with basing your identity on these things. The first is that, in my experience, they'll never satisfy you. They'll always leave you wanting just a little bit more. And the second problem is that if they're ever taken away from you, that loss of identity can be crushing. And how do I know this? Well, this is something I learned while I was getting my PhD at MIT. You see, before I got to MIT, I will humbly say that I felt like if I put in enough work, I could be at or near the top of pretty much any class I was in. And when I showed up at MIT, I found myself in an environment where there were most classes that I could put in as much work as I wanted to and not break the mean. And I'll tell you, that loss of identity can be really crushing, and it forced me to re-examine where I was getting my identity from. Now, one of the things that really helped me during that time was reflecting on a movie, the movie Chariots of Fire. If you haven't seen this movie, it's about two runners in the 1924 Olympics, Eric Liddell and Harold Abrams. In the movie, Harold's identity was a lot like mine when I started at MIT. He was consumed by the pursuit of success and controlled by the fear that he wouldn't be able to maintain that success in his next race. At one point in the movie, he talks about having 10 seconds to justify my whole existence in his next race and not knowing whether he could do it or not. And I'll tell you, that's something I can really sympathize with. The contrast to this in the movie is Eric Liddell's life. Eric Liddell's life is not driven by fear of not living up to an external, impermanent standard of success, but it's based on enjoying God's pleasure in his work. For me, the classic line in the movie is where Eric's talking to his sister about whether he should give up running and focus on being a missionary in China. And Eric says to his sister in a wonderful Scottish accent, "Jenny, God made me for China, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure." Okay? And I'll tell you, a transformational moment for me was moving from being driven by a desire to maintain my position as a successful person and having to constantly compare myself to the achievements and expectations of everyone around me to a place where I could simply enjoy feeling God's pleasure in my work. So to sum up, I feel like the desire we all have for success and power and security and praise, that desire is legitimate. It's just that I was trying to satisfy it in an illegitimate way, and in a way that would always leave me at risk and always leave me wanting more. And once I was able to find satisfaction for those desires in someone who would never let me down, it freed me from being a slave to my work and a slave to living up to external standards, and allowed me to find real joy in serving God through my work, and to see hard work as a way of saying thank you to God for a gift that I was given. And if that's something you're interested in, I'd really encourage you to take a look at what Jesus was saying in both his life and his death, and to think about trading a life of never being sure of whether you've done enough work to gain acceptance in exchange for a life where work can be a joyful response to an acceptance that's already been secured for you. And if there's anything I can do to help you think about that, either tonight or in the future, I want you to know I'd be more than happy to talk to you. Thank you.
Wow. Well, these are two very hard acts to follow. And I have to say, this is an enormous crowd. We're so impressed. I think that the three of us, anyway, thought there'd be about 10 of you out there tonight. So this is kind of fabulous. So, and I just want to quickly also thank the students from the Veritas Forum who have just been amazing in putting this together, and to say what a pleasure it's been to work with these three. They're so much fun, so smart, and so much fun. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to say tonight, I ran across a blog by a woman named Bonnie Ware, who works in palliative care. So she works with the dying. And in her blog, she had recorded the regrets that she heard most often expressed by people on their deathbed. And the second most commonly expressed regret was, "I wish I hadn't worked so hard." And I think that's a really profound regret, and one that we ought to take seriously, and it touches on some of my core beliefs about work. Those beliefs, by the way, don't come out of any religious or philosophical tradition. They're probably as informed as much by anthropology as anything else. I guess I would describe myself as an agnostic in that I don't really know what's out there beyond sort of what I sense is out there. I was raised by Quakers. I spent 5 years in a Hindu country, and I married a Jew. So I'm open to all religions. So what do I believe about work? This is kind of heresy to say at a place like CMU, where I think work is really practically a religion. But I believe strongly that we, and I include myself in that, work too hard, that we value work too highly and too uncritically, and that we undervalue rest and reflection. And in saying this, I have no special expertise beyond my own life experiences, so I wanted to share three and then sort of sum it up. So one of the experiences that was influential for me was actually reading an article in graduate school. See, it can actually be influential to read articles in graduate school. But this was one by an anthropologist named Marshall Solins, and it was called The Original Affluent Society. And the affluent society Solins was referring to there was hunters and gatherers. How many of you would associate hunters and gatherers with affluence? Nobody. One. One person, two. But what Solins was pointing out in this article, and it really made an impression on me, it really sort of shook up my worldview, was that, first of all, hunters and gatherers worked only about half as many hours a week as we do. They had very few of the infectious diseases of agricultural societies or the cancers and chronic illnesses of modern industrialized societies. They experienced violence and conflict, but on nothing like the level of modern-day wars and genocides. They ate a balanced diet. They had ample time for socializing. They exercised regularly, and they got plenty of sleep. Raise your hand if that's true for you. The same guy who likes the hunters and gatherers. Yes. So that really got me thinking. It made me start to really wonder, first off, how can we simultaneously be so affluent and so fundamentally impoverished? Because those things are not incidental. And it made me start to think, what are we scrambling towards and what are we giving up in the process? What is all this hard work for? Which brings me to the second experience. So I was asking those questions when I was living in Nepal, which I did for 5 years on and off. I was also born in Nepal. And Nepalis work very, very hard, but they don't seem to fetishize work the way that we do. They see it sort of as something you have to do and as a means to an end, but not an end in itself. They aren't enslaved to the clock. They don't constantly rush from one thing to the next, and they have time for each other. They spend a lot of time together just socializing, just hanging out. And Nepali friends of mine who came to the United States, sort of expecting the land of milk and honey, were really alarmed by how stressed and busy Americans were. This was an idea that I heard echoed in a book I read recently, a novel by Hector Tobar called The Barbarian Nurseries. Did anybody read that? It's really good. The context there is Mexican immigration to the United States, and it's set in Los Angeles. And this is one passage that stood out to me, because the sentiments were kind of similar. Among Mexicans, Tobar writes, the peculiar coldness of the Norte Americanos was legendary because it came to infect the many paisanos who lived among them. One heard how individualism and the cult of work swallowed up the hours of the American day, their sunsets and their springtimes, causing their family gatherings, their friendships, and their old people to disappear. So it's that cult of work, as he calls it, that I'm so skeptical about. It's this sort of headlong, uncritical embrace of productivity and work. And what worries me is the hours that are swallowed up by it when there are only so many hours in a day and only so many days in a life. Which brings me to the third thing, which was that my sister, Emily, died when she was 36. She was perfectly healthy until she wasn't. She was diagnosed with cancer in April of 2003, and by November, she was dead. She was a professional violinist and a member of a Baroque ensemble, and she loved her work. She made CDs, she had a group that she particularly loved, but she also had a 9-year-old daughter. So nobody dies that young without a lot of regrets, but I'm happy to say I don't think she had the sorts of regrets that Bonnie Ware was talking about. So she'd done work that was immensely fulfilling, but she hadn't let it crowd out the other things that matter, which in her case, most importantly, was time with her daughter. And she recognized that work, while important, is only part of life and often not the most important part. So there's a reason that people's deathbed regret is not, I wish I'd worked harder. Life is short, sometimes much shorter than you bargain on, and you can't spend too much of it working. So you may be thinking, that's easy for me to say when it's faculty here at CMU who are loading you up with work, who are giving you so much to do. And you're right, you're right. So I think it's important, and David said this also, but I think it's incumbent upon faculty, first of all, to provide a humane education as well as a rigorous one, to challenge you but not beat you down, and to recognize that rest and reflection and sleep and exercise and time with friends plays a really important role in creativity and innovation. That those things are part of your work. They ought to be part of your work. At the same time, and this is kind of the crux of, I think, of what I want to get across, is how you handle the demands of work is up to you. It is now and it will be throughout your life. That nobody is going to turn down the treadmill for you. The treadmill just goes faster. And it's you who has to set the controls. It's you who's going to have to decide how much you work and where you put your energy. And you can decide what you care about and put your energy there. And you can determine what you need to be happy and healthy and have a balanced life and make room for it. And if that means that you can't excel at everything, so be it. Just as nobody's deathbed regret is, I wish I'd worked harder, nobody's is, I wish I hadn't gotten a C in calculus. So you have choices. So if you love your work, I think you should pour yourself into it. I love my work. I work hard. I think that hard work is satisfying. But don't just grind away because you've been told hard work is virtuous, that you ought to. Think about what you're doing. weigh the trade-offs, make conscious choices, do what you need to do, what you personally need to do, what you find satisfying, what you think is important, and not what other people think you ought to do. Think about work as something larger than just your job and what earns you income, because there's a lot of ways that you can put your time and energy into the world and contribute and be helpful and do wonderful things that isn't part of your job. Don't underestimate the need for rest and reflection. I think that's where most of the real learning happens, is when you reflect on what you've learned. And often when you step away from work is when the best ideas come to you. That's when a lot of the really good stuff happens. And make time for people, because ultimately they're what matters most. So those are my thoughts. I expect that your beliefs about work, like mine, will change. Mine changed about 12 times as I was working on this, so my guess is it's always a work in progress. And I just really want to thank you all for coming, so thanks.
I think usually when we talk about work, it's defined as having something to do with physics, energy, expenditure, labor, and employment, of course. Think about that a lot, especially in this political season. But here, I think we've heard some more personal reflections on work. And, things on personal satisfaction, on values, and even on meaning. And I know as I have talked with Professors Norman and Kosbie and Smith, they've actually found this evening, preparing for this evening, to be an immense challenge. And these are some pretty brilliant people. But, sometimes you are faced with questions that are obvious questions, and sometimes the obvious questions are the hardest ones to come up with obvious answers for. And so here's just one more question, which I think ought to be kind of an obvious question. I'm not sure it's an easy one to answer, but let's all have a go at it. I know when a student turns in a good essay on Blackboard or hand in a good test, a lot of us will just say, good work. But that's really a loaded term. We're talking about work. What is good work? Duck.
Boy, that's a tough question. I guess one way to view it is to tease apart the word good. Mm-hmm. Right, so,
are these on? Are the mics on?
Okay. Yes. So certainly we have a basic level of understanding, which is it's got to meet the standards, the technical standards of what was requested. It's got to work if it's a computer program.
It's nice.
If it's an essay, it better be well written and argue forcefully. But that's just such an empty level of analysis from what you're asking. So rephrase it, what distinguishes superlative work is the way I'm going to rephrase that then. The memorable work. And we have students every semester, I mean, we have more than I can count, who transcend the day-to-day of whatever the course is and manage to achieve a different level. And how do they do that? And for starters, I'm just going to tell you, much as I do agree we have to have balance here, they somehow do it by violating that and immersing themselves so deeply. Their level of understanding and mastery simply transcends their peers, and it's evidenced in their work. But beyond that, they begin to see the tendrils, the connections from the boring, dry subjects that we teach and the interesting, fascinating stuff that is their life. And as they turn what we teach back upon themselves into something meaningful for them, what comes out is this pouring of love, of passion. And that's where their work becomes remarkable, as opposed to just work. I don't think that we can make you work hard on stuff we care about. I just don't think we can do it. The only way you're going to work hard is if it's something you care about. That's my takeaway.
So yeah, you said no to grades as the ultimate motivator. I don't think you said no to grades, but at least as an ultimate motivator, no to gold, no to glory, and it was yes to curiosity, community, caring.
Exactly, and community is actually a huge one. it's true if you're working hard, you're not spending a lot of time with friends watching Gilligan's Island. Do people watch that anymore? You all know what I'm talking about, right? We used to watch that on TVs. People have those, right?
Oh, you remember TV.
Yes. But I believe that hard work actually fosters community. I think that, for instance, 112, the course I teach, is itself a community. And people get very tight in that community. And they spend a lot of time together and a lot of shared sacrifice. And shared sacrifice and shared commitment fosters community. And so community doesn't come cheap. Whether it's here at CMU or with your family and people you love, if you neglect those ties wither. But here, in the midst of all this hard work we do it together. And whether it's a computer science assignment or when you're preparing for production, a dramatic production, it's that same labor of love that fosters shared community. And then the caring element, which I've already said several times. It's giving back to the world. I know it sounds almost, I don't know, hoity-toity, and I don't know, maybe it's the wrong adjective. It sounds trivial to say it's good to give to other people. But I gotta tell you, having watched thousands of students come through here, time and again, when they're in my office in tears, it's for one of two reasons. Okay? They're either in tears because they're not making the grade here. By the way, the people who aren't making the grade here typically are trying too hard. It's exactly what you said. They're spinning their wheels and trying very hard, but they're not getting traction. We almost never have people who don't try here. They're just not trying right. But the real tears that I love are the tears of joy. Just had them just this week. We had a student who he got an excellent grade in the course, and it didn't mean much to him. And then he just started applying it as he cared. And he's on just things that matter to him. And now, just this week, in fact, today I got a beautiful email from him that he scored a fabulous research position and got a job on the same day. Pretty good day. But it's a low-paying job that doesn't matter much in terms of his development financially. It just happens to be exactly what he wants to do, and it's a charitable work. And he was crying out of his excitement for this. So I believe hard work can foster deep community ties, socialization through hard work.
Good work.
Good work? Well, I had mentioned that I wish I hadn't worked so hard was the second deathbed regret. The first one was I wish I'd lived a life that's true to who I am. It's true to myself. And so I see good work as work that is true to who you are. It's work that has integrity because it comes from a true place in who you are, what you care about, what you love, where you want to be, who you want to work with, and what you want to produce. So I guess I would think of good work in those terms, that it depends on the person.
Mm-hmm. I go back to that quote from Chariots of Fire, and it's one that means a lot to me. Sort of Eric Liddell saying, God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. And this will sound completely geeky, but there's a certain pleasure to writing a paper that you know is using the gifts you've been given in a way that honors the giver. It's almost, I think about my kids, and the Bible has a lot of imagery talking about God as Father and us as sons. I think about my kids coming to me with pictures and saying, look at this. And, they're never going to hang in the National Gallery, but they're good work.
I want to push you just a little harder on something you said toward the beginning of your presentation. You were talking about velocity and working metaphorically off of some of Newton's laws, right? And you said the student who works harder wins. Could you kind of just zero in a little more on what winning was when you said that? I mean, really, were you talking about those lovely, things about community and all of that? Is that the winning?
Well, winning is in the eye of the beholder, right?
Okay.
But I'm not going to duck the question that easily.
Not with Paul.
No. So to be anecdotal then, since you wanted some, and to pop out of the bubble that is CMU, I can cite a few examples quickly. One of them was, these are just random occurrences through my life. One we were talking about was on the way to the SATs, when I was, apparently to get into Harvard you have to take SATs. And I knew enough to know I had to work hard in preparation for that, and I worked very hard for years. I seemed to do math pretty well, but like this English thing, apparently like you have to know like words and their meanings. And now, fortunately, they publish lists of these things. They're like, memorize these 5,000 words, get a top score on the SATs. So I did. I just had index cards. I just memorized them. And so I was pretty confident that I'd do okay. I was also pretty arrogant back then. Nothing, nothing dispenses with arrogance faster than hanging out with actual smart people. But it hadn't happened to me at that point all that much, to be honest. I mean, it doesn't for in high school. Look, you're all used to being the smartest person in the room. Then you come here, and we all are. In any case, so I'm driving to the SATs, which is, I'm a procrastinator. So it's the last possible SAT I can take and still apply to college. No worries. And on the way there, on the very last turn to get there, I have a green arrow, and I turn left, and the person coming towards me had a green light, and bam, head-on collision. And so I, in a tizzy, run out and see if they're okay, and the gentleman was crying, and I finally got him to roll down the window. He was crying, "My new car!" But apparently it's a brand new Cadillac, and it's the first time he was driving it, so oops. So I then, once I realized he was actually okay, I ran to a phone, because this is before there were no such things as cell phones. Yes, I'm old. And I called my dad and asked him to please come there and take care of this, because I had to go take the SATs. And along comes San Diego's finest. I lived in San Diego at the time. And when they're there, I tell them, so I have to go take this test right up there in that building. And he says, no way. You're going to sit here and we're going to deal with this. And I'm begging him, please, I really have to. I won't go to college. And he didn't care. So I explained to him, all right, so here's the way this is going to work. I'm going to go to that building now. My dad will be here soon, and he can take care of this. Or you can come arrest me in that building now. And I ran up the hill, not knowing if he was running behind me. So I run into the building, panicked, and I find someone and say, all right, I'm here to take the SAT. And they say, so what? See, you're late. And if you're late, you're not allowed to take the SAT. And you've got to be kidding me. So I begged them, please, I was in a car accident. I'm telling you the truth. By the way, this is also, I have sympathy for some of my students who come up with the craziest stories.
Oh, I had that one too,
yes.
yeah.
So I begged them, and they actually said, all right, prove it. They walked outside with me, and I pointed down there to the accident. And I said, all right, so here's the problem. We have no mechanism, because it's not allowed. They basically said, we'll turn a blind eye and let you start, even though we're not allowed to. But you have to finish with everybody. And now I had to start 15, 20 minutes late, totally rattled. My brain was just a total mess, and I didn't have time to do anything but just sit down and let it all hang out on my one and only shot to get into college. And this gets back to, look, I have students here who tried to study for a test the night before the test, tried to cram, which is ridiculous. Okay? It's making your life all about the test. It's thinking that that test matters, and it doesn't. The learning matters. And had they learned all semester long, then the night before the test, A, they'd get a good night's sleep, B, they'd be calm about it, right? And C, even if something happened that night, they'd be able to respond. Well, something happened to me in a big way on the way to the SATs, and I went in there and knocked them out of the park. Because I spent years preparing for that day, and a car accident wasn't going to stand between me and those SATs.
Okay. Yeah. I come from another side of campus than you do. And it's very strange in the College of Fine Arts. In the School of Music, we use the word work a lot, but work is usually used as a noun. You guys tend to use it both ways, as a verb and as a noun. But what we do is we create works. We perform works that somebody else has created. Could be 1,000 years ago. And here's what's totally twisted about it. Okay, so when we are people who perform or compose works, do you know how we do it? We play it. All right? Isn't that the weirdest thing?
Yep.
And I tend to work at the interface of creativity and spirituality. And you can look at the place works play in various religious systems. The idea of karma, where your works or your actions are going to generate kind of a cause and effect system, or you've got a mitzvah. You can do this good work. There are about 613 if you want to count them, right? Good works and prohibitions that come from God, and you're better off if you do them the right way. And in Christianity, you talk about works. Although there's an interesting thing. There was kind of a fight in the Reformation in the 15th, 16th century, where the Protestant idea was you didn't want to emphasize the works over grace. This is the kind of thing Mike Smith was talking about. And yet, even though, okay, so it's kind of like works bad, right? It's all about grace, and yet, where did this phrase come from? The Protestant work ethic. For whatever reason, most of us want to excel. We want to have some sort of a legacy. We want to leave works behind. We want to leave great works behind. What's the relationship between excellence on one hand and perfectionism, shall we say, on the other? Might be another way of framing some of the things I think all of you were at least hinting at.
I think perfectionism is the enemy of excellence. I think perfectionism gets in the way. The perfectionism ties you up in knots. Perfectionism makes you tense. It keeps you from kind of accessing things that would bring creativity or fresh air into your perspective. So I think it's dangerous, and I know that from personal experience. I struggle with it, So I think it's something to try very hard to steer clear of.
Grace, works, perfectionism.
I mean, I can go back to sort of what I was talking about, right? That these desires for power and security and acceptance, they're all legitimate desires, but at least in my life, I found that I was trying to satisfy them in the wrong way. And it's really seductive. And let me give you the example that comes most naturally to me. My lovely, beautiful, extraordinarily patient wife, I was talking to her. I'd just gotten tenure, and I said to her, you know what, as soon as I get full professor, I think I'm going to relax and spend more time with the family, right? And she says, in a perfectly calm way, she says, do you realize you said exactly that same thing 3 years ago about tenure?
Ouch.
Right? That if you're getting your satisfaction from these external things, at least in my life, I've found they never really satisfy you. And they always leave you wanting to do just a little bit more until you get...
Keep moving.
That's exactly right. My soccer coach in high school would do these wind sprint drills where you'd sprint to the 10-yard line, sprint to the 15-yard line, and sprint to the 20-yard line where he was standing. And then when you got to the 20-yard line, he'd start running backwards. Yeah. And it's sort of like all of these things are like that. It's a standard that starts moving as soon as you get close to it. Unless you can find that satisfaction in something permanent and unchanging and something that won't let you down. And for me, I've found that in God.
Okay, fire drill here. We've got some great questions coming in. And Some of these can be addressed. I think you'll be spending time moving around the tables, I think, later on when people are in their breakout groups, their discussion groups. But some of these, you really got to ask them right here in public because they're great questions. If work is such a goal, yeah, I was wondering this one actually too. I wanted to ask you about the relationship of pleasure to work, so that's right in here. If work is such a goal, why do most people try to avoid it and look for leisure? One answer. Who's inspired here?
Maria and I are sort of hoping we can run out the clock with David.
Yeah, okay. Run with it.
That's a good
People
question.
are weak and they're incapable of finding pleasure in great work, which is why people don't come to CMU. We don't have average people here. We have very special people here. And I don't believe that the average CMU student would subscribe to avoiding work is necessary for obtaining pleasure. So I reject the question wholesale.
Follow-up for David here. What happens when you are living healthy and work really, really hard and nothing changes or you don't succeed? How do you keep working hard?
That's a good question.
That always works. Okay, now, okay, Mike. Oh, no, sorry.
For starters, you have to fail many times before you succeed. And accepting that your efforts, even if they don't bear fruit, are part of our collective efforts as humanity to improve our lot. That may not actually, I don't know, be deeply satisfying to some people, but it is the truth. But my experience is, having watched, again, so many people work hard here and elsewhere. For instance, say like at Microsoft, where my wife would routinely show up in the morning trying not to crash into Bill Gates. This is actually true. They were the two driving through the parking lot often. I always told her, if you actually crash into him, you have to make 2 phone calls. Okay? The second one is to 911. The first one is to me so I can sell our stock. So, but she'd come in with last night's dinner and that morning's fresh underwear for me because I was working literally about 100 to 120 hours a week every single week at that phase of my life. And I worked, and I worked, and I worked, and I worked, and I don't know if I accomplished a lot. Now, I had other phases in Microsoft where I think I did accomplish a lot. Somehow, all that work wasn't getting a whole hell of a lot done. So if you're saying, does hard work equal results or progress, I would say definitively no. No, they're independent. And if you're working hard and you're not getting much done, you're probably not working very smart. My freshman year, I worked harder than everybody. And I got terrible grades and put myself in the hospital. It's true. I spent a month ill and wound up, because of that, getting 1 out of 12 or 1 out of 11 questions right on a physics final. Yeah, failing a final is a nice experience. I failed a final because I worked so damn hard. So the answer is no, you shouldn't work so hard that you are making yourself miserable. You've got to find that balance. And if you're working hard and not getting the results you're looking for, continue to work hard in the faith that things will turn your way as they do, but even so, make sure you're attending to the whole self and not starting the death spiral of working harder. If it's not now, if this isn't enough, a little more, because where does that end?
Hospital. To Mike, if our identity is based on grace, why keep working?
That is a great question.
Seems logical to me.
Is that going to work for me any better than it worked for David? It's a really good question. Here's what, so on the first day of my class, I typically have the students introduce themselves, and then I introduce myself. And I introduce myself, in part by saying that I'm a Christian, and my Christian faith is something that's important to me. And as I understand it, one of the tenets of the Christian faith is this idea of servant leadership. This idea that if you want to lead a group of people, you have to be willing to be their servant. And this idea comes from Jesus' last meal with his disciples, where instead of asking them to pay him homage for his achievements, he took on the lowliest role of the culture of that time and washed their feet. which if you imagine people walking around in sandals all day in a environment where donkeys are the mode of transportation, you can understand why that's the lowliest position, right? And I typically tell my students, I'm not going to wash your feet, I'm not even going to wash your car, but one of the things that animates me as a professor is this idea of following what Jesus taught and being a servant in my work. That's something that really gets me excited when I get up in the morning, if that makes sense.
Got a great question here for Marie Norman.
Excellent. That's good.
And the answer is, that's a good question.
Or that's
It is a good
terrible
question.
Throw it out.
If I don't work hard, how can I change the world? If I don't change the world, who will?
If I don't work hard,
How can I change
how can
the
I
world?
change the world?
If I don't change the world, who will?
Good question.
Somebody out there has, somebody has the weight of the whole world on their shoulders out there right now. Comfort them.
I would hope everyone here would work hard, but keep some limits on it. I guess that's what I would say. Is if you're in the lab every day till midnight, then you're not tucking your kids in at night. You know, I mean, there are trade-offs, and the trade-offs can be extreme. You can miss your kids growing up. You know, you can fail to take care of yourself for long periods of time, and I don't think that's acceptable. So I think to the extent to which you can use the time that you have at work really well, work very hard, and try to make it as playful as possible. Try to bring in the elements of play that make work rewarding, or the elements of service that make work rewarding. Good. But then leave at the end of the day, for God's sake. I mean, it's like you don't owe your soul to your job. And you can change the world, I think, and still be home in time for bedtime, for the kids' bedtime. I guess I sort of feel that way.
This one's kind of for Mike and Marie, but Mike especially. Can you respond to Marie's comments on rest and relaxation, but with a Christian perspective on rest? And this kind of actually reminds me of a term we have here in the academy, which is you take a what? A sabbatical, right? You know, which comes from
Sabbath.
From Jewish and Mesopotamian concepts. So yeah, Mike, how about giving us some perspectives on rest there?
So the idea of Sabbath, as I understand it in the Christian religion, is the idea that baked into how the world was created is this idea that you should take 1/7 of your time and rest. Now, that is incredibly challenging when you really need 120% of your time to do work. And one of the things that, again, really animated me in grad school when I was, just barely keeping my head above water was this idea that if there really is a God outside of me who loves me and is going to take care of me, and he said, take 1 day out of 7 off, that he's going to honor that decision if I do it. And I found him to be very true to that throughout grad school. To be honest, I don't claim that I was perfect about this, but again, I don't know that that's the point. But I really found that taking a day off out of 7, God really honored and didn't leave me behind where I would have been if I'd worked. Does that answer the question?
It makes sense. I mean, that's actually kind of related to another question somebody sent you, actually. I think it's related. If God's acceptance is already existent, what drives you to keep on doing good things? What is the motivating factor?
That's a great question. And again, if God, if God really says there's nothing you can do to get rid of, go, do whatever you want, you're not going to lose your acceptance.
Right.
Why not just party and at least in my life, really understanding what Jesus gave up to gain that acceptance for me. It's something where you really want to say thank you. You really want to give back. and serve God in a way that's going to honor him. But you're right. Conceptually, you could do whatever you want. You can't lose that acceptance.
Here's the second from the last question.
For me again?
No, for everybody. Do you think your philosophies of work carry over to interpersonal relationships?
My wife's here.
A little follow-up to this. For example, no matter how hard you work, you can't make someone be your friend or fall in love with you or anything like that. So how does your philosophy of work carry over to interpersonal relationships? It's a good question.
It's a great question. Marie?
We were going to go out and have a drink, weren't we?
I'm just as lazy about my personal relationships as I am about work. There we go. Wow, how does
You never get a rest from them, though.
Well, I actually think that in personal relationships, and I'll take marriage as an example here, that getting some distance from one another is healthy. And I feel the same way about work. Getting distance from work is healthy. It helps you see things more clearly. It gives you more perspective. It's a good opportunity sometimes to kind of let fights settle and things like that. So I guess I'm a believer in that in personal relationships too, that sometimes just going your separate ways for a little while can be a good antidote to problems, to tension, to issues in personal relationships.
I think in the Christian worldview, I would probably start with marriage. So there's a book in the Bible called Hosea where, as the story goes, God comes to Hosea and he says, I want you to go marry a woman who is going to be unfaithful to you over and over and over again. And I want you to do that because I want you to understand how I treat my people. And so in interpersonal relationships, I think the standard is, particularly with the spouse, that there's nothing, just as there's nothing that I can do to lose God's favor, there ought to be nothing that she can do that would cause me to lose my favor. That's a serious standard, and I don't know that I live up to it. But I think that's the Christian understanding of interpersonal relationships, that you need to go after them with the same understanding of how God treats you.
See any parallel between your work philosophy and relationship issues?
Absolutely. To start, though, with relationships, state the obvious. There's no explaining love. So let's not try. Years ago, I went to a party, coat and tie affair, and afterwards, a bunch of us, too full of ourselves, 20-somethings, stepped outside in the cold Pittsburgh air in March, I think it was, and had to be March because everyone was trying to out-impress the other one with the club that they wanted to go to and being so smart and so in. So I said, why don't we go for Shamrock Shakes? And everyone looked at me like I was an idiot, because I guess I was, except for this one cute girl who said, yeah, that'd be great. And she was cute enough and had enough, whatever, energy and whatnot about her that somehow when she said it, everyone in the group said, okay. And I thought, wow, I can marry her. Yeah. And of course I did.
Yeah.
So I can't apply any sense to how love and obligation and relationship starts because it's nonsense. It's mystic. But once there, now I can speak to what one does about it. I'll start with my work. I have found, yes, I do work my students hard. You bet I do. I'd like to think I do it ethically. Well, sometimes maybe not, but you know, there's a bad side to me too. But I'd like to think so. But here's what I find. The more that I pour into my work, the harder I support my students, the better it is for me. It seems to work better for them too, but I get more out of it. This is the best job I've ever had in my life. And it is, and it's because of the love I get from my students for pouring into them all I've got. It's the single best experience of my life, except, and I'm sorry, you guys don't come in first, you come in second, except for my family. And nothing beats the love and stability and the general warmth that flows over my life from my family. But how does that happen? I don't think it comes for free. I don't think you get it because you're biologically related or that you've got one of these around your finger. You know, I think it's all from what you pour into it. And the harder you pour yourself into that, it's just like students pouring yourselves into a course or an activity, the more you get in return. And I can give you many examples, but they would be very trite, because guess what? It is trite. There's no single special awesome thing you can do for someone. I mean, to me, the single greatest thing I do in my life is play catch with my kids and go on dog walks with my wife. It just doesn't get better than that. But I make sure I do it all the time.
Final question. And it comes back, they're kind of two related questions, but it comes back to legacy again. And we looked at legacy before. But it reminds me of your opening anecdote about deathbed statements, about regrets. In relation to work, what are your biggest regrets?
Well,
in work.
one regret, I'm sure I have many regrets, but certainly one that comes to mind is that I wish that I had taken my PhD dissertation and turned it into a book. But I had a new baby, and I was utterly overwhelmed and exhausted, and I never did. And I look back at that with some regret, but when I really am honest with myself about it, if I was back in the same situation again, I would have done exactly the same thing. It's just, you do what you need to do at any given time in life, I think. So, so I have a tinge of regret. On the other hand, I'm not sure actually that
It's worth it.
that it's worth it. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Regrets
biggest regret. I almost failed out of high school because me and my buddies discovered that if we left the high school parking lot in the morning, we could get in like a half day of skiing and still get back to high school by the end of the day. And you know, so I didn't really apply myself in high school. And I remember my dad, in utter frustration, taking me out for a drive and ultimately pulling over to the side of the road and saying, "You have more potential than anyone else in this family, and it breaks my heart to see you blowing it the way you are." And then just pulling back onto the road and driving home, right? And sort of being told you've been given something and you're not using it is enough to get your attention.
Yeah. Besides that story we weren't going to tell here, you know, any other?
Well, fine.
Yeah.
So there's an unrelated story that's trite in many ways, as everything I say is. I apologize. But it actually directly informs the answer to that. And you have to flash back when I finished Microsoft and came here to Pittsburgh, which, by the way, I didn't realize when you marry into Pittsburgh families, there's fine print. You should read the marriage contract carefully. Upon having the second child, thou shalt move back to Pittsburgh.
Right.
So being bound by this contract, we did. And we moved to the Sewickley area at the time. Now we live in Mount Lebanon. And I was teaching at Sewickley Academy, a local private school. And I was teaching private as an aside, not that it matters, but I hadn't been certified to teach publicly yet, which I did over the next 2 years. So I was working late one evening, and the family, because my mother-in-law lives in Mount Lebanon, was in Mount Lebanon, and I was working late, and it was a holiday, and they're all waiting for me for the holiday dinner. And I'm in my coat and tie at work, working away, and of course I was very late because I'm always very late, right? But I was working. So anyway, I finally leave to get there, and as I'm getting on the freeway at this very dark entrance ramp in the cold, it was maybe 35 degrees and driving rain, The car in front of me hit a dog and sent the dog flying through the air and smashing into the railing and down. And then the car drove away. So I stopped, of course, and I'm looking at this dog in my headlights. And the dog was severely injured and almost for sure mortally injured. And broken bones, and it was sadly bloody as well. And so now you're faced with a what do you do moment. And the thing is, no one's watching. No one's going to know about it unless you're an idiot and 10 years later tell everyone in an auditorium. This is between you and your conscience. No, this was between me and my conscience. And I'm in my nice suit, my one and only, and I've got my family waiting for me. And so I get out of the car, into the rain, and I walk over to the dog. And as I get near the dog, it slips under the railing, giving ground. And I just want the dang thing to just sit there so I could pick it up and carry it to the car and take it to a hospital or something. And I go under the railing. Actually, I went over the railing, and it backed away. And it got to the edge of this hill, and I'm, don't back up. And then it backed up, and it slid down the hill. And I listened to it going through brush and going down the hill to the bottom of the hill. It's pitch black. We're now off the road. There is no light. It is driving rain. It's just a sheet of mud down the hill. And I'm standing at the top of the hill. Now my suit's already ruined. And I'm wondering, what do I do? Do I go down the hill? And I'm listening to the dog down there, and it's killing me because he's clearly in agony. And I stood there, and then I walked back to my car, and I got in my car, and I drove away. And I thought, I did all I could do. And that was good enough to get me halfway to Mount Lebanon. And then I thought, no, my God, I didn't do all I could do. And I fancy myself the guy who goes down that hill. Who the hell cares about muddy shoes and a ruined suit? My suit was ruined anyway. Okay? I was going to be very unpopular when I showed up hours late in a soaked suit. Would it matter if I showed up an hour later in a muddy soaked suit? And I didn't go down the hill. And to this day, I mean, I'm very troubled by this. I view myself as a certain person, and yet I can't. Because, look, practical humanism, practice. I didn't put into practice my own beliefs. And to this day, I suffer for it. And I swore it's not going to happen again. Of course, sadly, I'm human, so it does. But I try my damnedest to minimize it. I try to live a life so that if and when it's over, I think that's more of a when. It's when.
Space-time continuum being.
I may fall short on every single one of my goals, but I won't have regrets about it. And I hope you feel the same way in living your life.
David Kosbie, Michael Smith, and Marie Norman. Thank you. Joanna?
Good day to have you.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.